Masks come off outdoors in South Korea. From Monday, the outdoor mask mandate is effectively removed as COVID-19 cases continue on a downward trend. But exceptions remain for large-scale gatherings. Civilians in Ukraine flee the bunkers of the Azovstal steelworks after the United Nations and the International Red Cross coordinate an evacuation from the besieged city of Mariupol. President-elect Yoon picks his top advisors on national security and key domestic issues. Former diplomat and academic Kim Sung-han, known for his staunch support of Seoul-Washington ties, is named National Security Advisor.
Hello and welcome to New Day at Arirang. It's Monday, May 2nd, 8 a.m. here in Seoul, South Korea, and I'm Lee Seung-jae.
I'm Oh Soo-young. Thank you for joining us this morning because over the next hour, we'll be giving you the biggest headlines of the day and experts' insights on some of the key issues facing Korea and the rest of the world. As of 9 p.m. Sunday, there were nearly 20,000 new cases of COVID-19 here in South Korea.
That's right, and as the number of new cases continue to fall, starting Monday, the country will scrap the outdoor mask mandate except for at-large gatherings. Ji has our top story.
Starting Monday, people in South Korea will be able to go outside without wearing a mask. This means people are no longer required to wear masks in most outdoor situations, including on hiking trails, at outdoor weddings, and at above-ground outdoor subway stations. This is the first time in almost a year and a half that the mask mandate has been lifted since October 2020, when the country implemented the measure.
Even after lifting all social distancing rules, the number of COVID-19 patients has been declining for the past 6 weeks. The number of new cases was down by 30% this week compared to the week before.
But there are a few exceptions. People will still need to wear a mask when they attend rallies, concerts, or sports events of 50 or more people. Also, wearing masks is recommended in places where it is difficult to maintain a distance of more than 1 meter from others for more than 15 minutes. So it's recommended that masks still be worn at places like amusement parks or on the beach. Masks are also strongly advised for those who have COVID-19 symptoms or those who are at high risk of infection, such as the elderly or those who have not been vaccinated. Although much of the mask mandate has been lifted, people will still have to wear masks indoors as well as on buses, subways, and taxis. Ji, Arirang News.
And now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. Of course, with more easing of restrictions, including the lifting of outdoor mask mandates here in the nation, all eyes are at how countries around the world are dealing with their eased measures.
And as liberating as it feels to take our mask off outdoors, many can't help but feel exposed at the same time. And while we discuss these concerns and how the global community needs to prepare for a future resurgence, which experts warn are coming. For this, we connect with Ben Cowling, Chair Professor of Epidemiology at the University of Hong Kong. Very warm welcome to you, Professor. And well, first off, many parts of the world, they've already started taking off their masks outdoors, and that's something that South Korea is actually starting today on Monday. And well, how have these countries been faring so far?
I think it makes a lot of sense because we know there's not a lot of COVID transmission outdoors. It's mainly indoors, other than, as you mentioned, maybe the large outdoor gatherings. And so I think it's a very sensible measure. Of course, when you're trying as hard as possible to stop transmission, you want to do everything possible, and an outdoor mask mandate would be part of that. But now the numbers are coming down in South Korea, just as they've come down in other parts of the world. I think it makes a lot of sense to remove that mandate, that requirement. Of course, people can still wear masks outdoors if they want them to.
You know, obviously the easing of the mask mandates come as, a number of countries, most countries are actually seeing fewer COVID-19 case results right now. And this could possibly be, as we talked about before, just so much immunity going on, so many people having been infected with COVID-19. Now, is it safe to say that if you've had Omicron, that you won't have to worry about getting the Omicron variant once again?
Not quite, because there's different sub-variants of Omicron. There's been a lot of BA1 and also BA2 going around in recent months. What we haven't yet seen around the world is BA4, BA5. Those are just starting to appear in Europe. So if those arrive in South Korea in the future, there may be a chance to get infected with those. So that's Omicron, BA4, BA5 maybe, but it will tend to be a much milder infection in people who've got immunity from a previous Omicron infection, whether it's BA1 or BA2. So our immunity is getting stronger and stronger following vaccinations and also following infections. And COVID is posing less of a threat now than it did in the past.
Professor Cowling, South Korea is giving second booster shots to its elderly population, and there have already been countries that have been initiating this. So what does the data look like for them in terms of efficacy?
For very old people, we know that the third dose gave a good boost to their immunity against severe disease particularly, but there was a wearing off of the effect. The effect was tending to wane, to reduce after maybe 3 to 6 months. And so there's a recommendation now in many parts of the world for older people to get their fourth dose. It's like a top up of their protection back up to the high level, maybe for another 3 to 6 months. And one of the questions going forwards is, what about future doses? Will they be every 3 months, every 6 months, every year? I think it's too early to say right now, but certainly for now, a fourth dose can improve protection in the most vulnerable people. We know that's the very old people particularly.
Yeah, it just seems like these new variants or subvariants are popping up quicker than new vaccines being developed at this time. But I mean, what we are seeing, and the WHO coming out saying that the reason why we're seeing a decline in number of cases just worldwide is because just the number of testing being done plummeting. From the number of testing that we've seen before. Now, what are some concerns that come with just less testing being done, other than, of course, the reduced number of cases that we're seeing?
Well, in the coming months and the coming years, I think we need to find better ways to do surveillance on COVID, because we can't rely on enormous numbers of tests being done as they had been in the last 2 years. Otherwise, if we don't have a better way of monitoring infections, it's going to be difficult to say when infections are up or when they're down. In South Korea, it's very clear right now that infections have been coming down for weeks. And that's nothing to do with testing. That's just because of the natural flow of the epidemic. But in the coming months, I'm sure there will be ups and downs in infection numbers around the world. And one of our problems is going to be figuring out exactly what's going in other parts of the world, because at the minute we're relying on case counts rather than a more stable surveillance system. That's something that I think the World Health Organization are going to have to resolve.
And lastly, Dr. Cowling, Dr. Anthony Fauci in the US said last week that America is now mostly out of the full-blown pandemic phase. And what about the rest of the world, though? When can we say that it's mostly out of the woods?
Well, so I think certainly for South Korea, it looks like you're moving out of the pandemic and into the post-pandemic phase, where I think in the coming weeks and the coming months, most of your pandemic restrictions will be relaxed, starting with the outdoor mask mandate, but moving to other restrictions as well. And then in the future, maybe we'll only see restrictions brought back as an emergency measure for a very short period of time. We won't see prolonged use of measures. Sorry. So I think most of the world is moving out of the pandemic phase into the post-pandemic phase. There's only a few areas of the world that are still really trying very hard to stop transmission, including recently Shanghai, of course, and Beijing.
Yeah, I guess we're just kind of hoping that we don't see another massive variant that we saw with the Delta variant last winter. Professor Cowling, as always, thank you very much for connecting with us, and looking forward to talking to you again next week.
Thank you.
Now, after more than 2 years of battling the COVID-19 pandemic, South Korea is, of course, taking measures to get life back to normal.
It's been 2 weeks since the country lifted the majority of its restrictions, and our Cha Min-jung went out to see what's changed.
In a public message on Saturday, Prime Minister Chung Se-kyun called for suspending operations of religious, indoor sports and entertainment facilities for 15 days.
Now, South Korea's social distancing measures have banned gatherings of more than 2 people after 6 p.m. A prevention measure this strict is quite unheard of so far.
From today, South Korea is starting its gradual transition back to normal life, a plan called Living with COVID-19, and that means the easing of social distancing rules.
Authorities say there's a chance of cases spiking if restrictions are all eased at once, but they have been gradually easing restrictions.
Well, now it's currently past midnight, and as you can see behind me, the streets of Hongdae are fully packed with people. After more than 2 years of trying to stem the spread of COVID-19, South Korea has made a bold move of removing its social distancing measures. From April 18th, limits on social gathering sizes were lifted, and businesses could operate for 24 hours a day.
I'm loving it. I didn't get a chance to hang out with my friends from university, so it feels great to be able to start doing that now.
I felt like I wasn't given enough time to spend with my friends, but thanks to the easing of restrictions, I can still hang out until this time, so it's great.
I'm not a fan of spending the evening with people from my workplace after work, but I was out with them until late, even yesterday. I think this is one of the downsides of easing restrictions.
Most business owners also welcome the news.
There are more company get-togethers. We've been getting more reservations for groups of 10 to 20 people.
Our sales have definitely increased. Previously, we only earned $230 to $400 a day, but now it's gone up to $1,100.
Large events including rallies are no longer limited to under 300 people, and religious services can be held at full capacity as well.
Even more restrictions have gone starting this week. I'm currently at a movie theater that's filled with the smell of popcorn. Previously, snacks were only allowed outside the theaters, but now people can enjoy them while watching movies.
I actually came here because I can now have popcorn while watching a movie. I think I'll enjoy the movie more now.
South Korea's largest cinema chain, CGV, said that on Monday, which was when eating was once again allowed, its ticket sales increased by 86% compared to the same day the previous week. If you take a look at a slot for past 2 a.m. next week, seats are already almost fully booked, despite it being very late at night.
Eating is also allowed at other indoor venues as well, like indoor sports stadiums. More than 3,000 people are here to enjoy the Korean Basketball League, and many of them are eating hamburgers and hot dogs.
I had some chicken and beer with my friends while watching the game. It feels great to be able to watch and enjoy the games with some food, just like we could 2 or 3 years ago.
Last year, it didn't feel like the playoffs were finals due to the antivirus measures, but now we can see fans cheering for the semifinals as if they were the finals. We will try hard to get good results in the finals and hope more fans come and cheer for us.
One of the perks of grocery shopping has returned as well, trying out food samplers. Shoppers couldn't do this for more than a year due to the pandemic. But now, they can feel free to try samples as long as they remember to put their masks back on afterward and keep a 1-meter distance from others. Not only that, people can also test makeup products before deciding to buy them. In line with the falling virus cases, COVID-19 has been downgraded to a lower classification. Since January 2020, it was categorized as a level 1 infectious disease, the most dangerous and highest on the government's 4-tier scale. Now it's been reclassified as a level 2 infectious disease, alongside other well-known diseases such as measles. The downgrade to level 2 means people no longer have to report a COVID-19 infection immediately as long as they report it within 24 hours. A level 2 disease also means self-isolation is no longer mandatory, but this requirement will still be in effect for at least another 3 weeks as the government is implementing a grace period. Once this ends, people with COVID-19 will be able to visit local clinics and hospitals to get treated, just like they would when they catch a cold or the flu.
When people get the flu, they can visit the hospital and get treated immediately. However, in-person treatment for COVID-19 patients is not as established yet, which in many cases delays the process of treating patients. The sooner the patients can get treatment all at one place, the better.
The country seems well on its way to getting life back to normal, but all eyes are now on South Korea's decision regarding the outdoor mask mandate. Health authorities on Friday announced that the mask requirement for outdoors will be partially lifted from May 2nd. The announcement comes in contrast to the Presidential Transition Committee's earlier comments that said the new administration would decide on the fate of outdoor mask requirements in late May. The public seems to have mixed reactions.
They say the situation is less serious now, so I feel happy to be able to take my mask off.
It's getting hot. Summer is coming, so I want to go out without a mask on.
Even with the virus situation improving, I think it's important that people with health issues still wear masks to protect themselves.
There are still a lot of people infected, so I think it's better to keep masks on just to be safe.
Professor Chan says that the lifting of the outdoor mask mandate comes following the falling number of infections, but still stressed that it is important to remain vigilant.
More than half the country's population have not been infected. Considering that, we must maintain mask mandates for indoor venues to protect seniors who are at high risk.
COVID-19 has changed many aspects of our day-to-day lives. While some people support South Korea's return to normal life, many others believe our lives won't be the same even with the lifting of restrictions. Among the changes is the way people work.
To be honest, I prefer working from home. It took me a long time to get to work, but when I'm working from home, I can spend more time doing what I like after work.
We have indefinitely implemented a remote working system since June last year. We are allowing employees to work at their preferred location regardless of whether COVID-19 becomes endemic.
Likewise, many would say that it's crucial to find the best way to coexist with the virus, whether that includes the lifting of social distancing rules or readjusting to new post-pandemic lifestyles. Cha Min-jung, Arirang News.
The United Nations and Ukrainian authorities have confirmed that a safe passage operation has successfully evacuated around 100 civilians from the besieged Mariupol steelworks, where they were trying to survive without water, food and sanitation. Kim Yo-sun has more.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said some 100 civilians have been evacuated from the Azovstal steel plant in the city of Mariupol. The UN later confirmed that an operation to evacuate Ukrainians had been underway since Friday. The organization's spokesperson explained that a safe passage operation is ongoing in coordination with the International Committee of the Red Cross. Women and young children were among those who have been evacuated from the plant, where they were trapped underground without water, sanitation, or food. The development comes as U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi made a surprise visit to the Ukrainian capital city, becoming the most senior American official to meet Zelensky.
We believe that we are visiting you to say thank you for your fight for freedom, that we are on a frontier of freedom, and that your fight is a fight for everyone. And so our commitment is to be there for you until the fight is done.
Pelosi said earlier that she hoped a $33 billion aid package for Ukraine requested by President Joe Biden will be passed in Congress as soon as possible. In a push to increase sanctions against Russian oligarchs, U.S. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has laid out plans to liquidate billions in frozen assets and donate the proceeds to Ukraine. Over $30 billion of Russian assets have been frozen. But under U.S. law, frozen assets are still owned by the person being sanctioned and cannot be transferred or sold. In related news, Moscow's defense ministry says it had targeted weapons supplied to Ukraine by Western countries and destroyed a runway at a military airfield in Odessa. Meanwhile, a former NATO Supreme Allied Commander for Europe said Sunday that the, quote, amazing incompetence of the Russian military in invading Ukraine has led to an unprecedented number of deaths among generals and other high-ranking officers. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
With the Yoon administration taking office in just over a week, the president-elect has picked members of his inner circle to advise him on the most important state affairs. Heading the National Security Office will be former Vice Foreign Minister Kim Sung-han, who's been a strong advocate for strengthening the alliance with the United States. Yoon Jung-min reports.
The names of the senior secretaries who will serve under President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol were revealed on Sunday by Yoon's pick for Presidential Chief of Staff Kim Dae-gi and his current Chief of Staff Chang Jae-won. To head the National Security Office, they named former Vice Foreign Minister Kim Sung-han. Kim currently leads the Foreign Affairs and Security branch of the Presidential Transition Committee and has reportedly played a leading role in designing Yoon's foreign and security policy, seeking to bolster the South Korea-U.S. Comprehensive Strategic Alliance.
We believe he is the right person to serve as a control tower for protecting the security of the nation and the people by actively responding to security environments at home and abroad.
Former Presidential Secretary on Security Strategy Kim Tae-hyo was named as the first Deputy Director of the National Security Office, while former Presidential Officer for Risk Management Shin In-ho was picked as the second Deputy Director. And former Operations Director at the Joint Chief of Staff Kim Yong-hyun is to serve as Chief of the Presidential Security Service. Yoon's senior political secretary will be former lawmaker Lee Jin-bok. His senior economic secretary, former Vice Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok, and his senior social secretary, Professor An Sang-hun of Seoul National University. As for Yoon's senior secretary for civil society, they named former lawmaker Kang Seung-kyu. In charge of communications will be former journalist and current vice president at Hyoseong Group Choi Young-bum. And former journalist Kang In-sun has been named spokesperson. The incoming Yoon administration is doing away with the separate office for policy, so there will be just two offices, one for national security and the other for the presidential secretaries. It's also getting rid of the senior secretary posts for civil affairs, employment, and personnel affairs, thereby cutting the number of secretaries from the current 8 to 5. This follows President-elect Yoon's pledge to downsize and streamline the presidential office. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Now, China's Special Representative on Korea Peninsula Affairs, Liu Xiaoming, has arrived in Seoul to discuss Pyongyang's nuclear issues. Now, speaking with journalists at Incheon International Airport upon arrival on Sunday, Liu explained that he hopes Beijing and Seoul will cooperate in discussions over alleviating tensions on the peninsula. Now, he also added that the key to the North Korean nuclear issue lies in the hands of Pyongyang and Washington. He'll be sitting down with his South Korean counterpart No Yu-duk tomorrow. Now, in other news, Korea's exports of food and farm produce so far this year rose to a new all-time high for the first quarter, led in large part by shipments of instant noodles or ramyeon. Now, the Korea Rural Economic Institute reports that from January to March, food exports rose to $2.21 billion, an increase of 11%. Now, shipments of instant noodles were up 15.9% from a year earlier to $180 million. Analysts elsewhere have attributed that trend to the growing global interest in Korean culture. Now, the region accounting for the biggest portion of food shipments overall was Southeast Asia. The biggest increases year on year, though, were in the UAE and the European Union. Now, the first quarter of this year, Korean car makers Hyundai and Kia have exported more than 100,000 units of their eco-friendly models. That is to say, their hybrids and electric models. Now, according to the Korea Automobile Manufacturers Association, exports of these models in the first 3 months of this year came to just over 111,000 units, an increase from a year earlier of 28.6%. Hyundai and Kia each accounted for about half of those. Exports of their full electric models were up more than 80%, led by Hyundai's flagship electric model, the Ioniq 5, and Kia's EV6.
It's time for Global Insights, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un warned again that the North could preemptively use its nuclear weapons if the regime's fundamental interest is threatened. This followed a massive military parade last week that commemorated its army's 90th anniversary. Now, following the North's 13 rounds of weapon launches this year, including a resumed testing of an intercontinental ballistic missile that could target the United States, the regime is posing a growing threat against South Korea and Japan with its shorter-range weapons too. We discuss where the North may be headed with Bruce Bennett, policy analyst at RAND Corporation, and Mitch Shin, non-resident research fellow at the Institute for Security and Development Policy, as well as chief Korea correspondent of The Diplomat. Very warm welcome to you both. And well, it's lovely to see you, Dr. Bennett. And my first question goes to you. So Kim Jong-un, he threatened once again that the North could preemptively use its nukes if its fundamental interest is attacked. So first of all, what falls into its range of fundamental interest?
Well, I think we have to recognize this is the Putin effect. Russian President Putin started the war with Ukraine, threatening that he would use nuclear weapons if the US and Europe intervened. Kim is trying to get as much leverage as he can out of his own nuclear weapons as a result. You know, in the Ukraine, the US and the European community held back and didn't send aid that we normally would have. So Kim is thinking, hey, he can gain some leverage out of his own nuclear weapons. And that means he could define almost anything as fundamental interests in order to try and influence South Korea and influence the United States. We have to recognize that this is his manipulation of our countries that he's trying to carry out.
And now, Mr. Shin, so Kim Jong-un, of course, he also vowed to step up the development of North Korea's nuclear program. And in recent weeks, there have been growing movements detected around key nuclear facilities. And would you say, from your observation, that these signs are really pointing to an imminent nuclear test?
Yes. The signal of nuclear weapons are explicit right now. But I think we don't have to overreact on that point because the South Korean President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol and Seoul's Defense Minister Seo are the ones who first mentioned about the possibility of striking against North Korea preemptively and ordered the South Korean troops to consolidate their capabilities on preemptive strike against North Korea. And for North Korea, nuclear weapons cannot be used to attack other countries because they do know that once they strike other countries with their nuclear weapons, then North Korea will be completely vanished from the map. So in order to keep Kim's family regime, and to guarantee the security of the country, what North Korea only can do is keep developing its nuclear missile programs so that other countries cannot even think of launching missiles toward it. Even though many experts and journalists are pointing out Kim's recent remarks over using his nuclear weapons as preemptive measures and saying the possibility of Kim Jong-un using his nuclear weapons as preemptive measures is raised, but I highly doubt that. And North Korea will continue to escalate the tensions in the Korean Peninsula this year, as they've done, but those tensions will be created by the North's ICBM or other ballistic missiles tested as we've been monitoring.
And Dr. Bennett, I wonder how you see things. What should we really expect to see from North Korea's next nuclear test when it actually happens? I mean, does it have the ability right now to build a small nuclear warhead?
They probably can build somewhat of a small nuclear weapon. I mean, nuclear weapon size is all a matter of magnitude. You know, initially they maybe had a nuclear warhead of 1 ton or more. They may be down to 500 kilograms, but the United States has warheads that are a few hundred kilograms. So they've been reducing the size they can achieve by their experimentation, but they haven't tested anything really small. And we won't know from a nuclear test whether it's a small weapon or a large one, because what we're going to see is the size of the explosion. They're not likely going to show us the device, allow us to weigh it, see if it really might work. And without that kind of evidence, we don't know whether or not it could really fit on a much smaller ballistic missile.
Mr. Shin, with the Yoon administration taking office very soon, you wrote that it's likely that an arms race is going to escalate between the South and North. Well, what options does Seoul have in terms of ramping up its arsenal against Pyongyang?
First, I would like to say there's nothing much Seoul can do to escalate or de-escalate the tensions in the Korean Peninsula, as its response to North Korea's nuclear and missile threats should always be counteractive, not preemptive, as it will always respond to them either after North Korea tests its missile programs or North Korea's state media makes its reports on major events. And even though the missile restrictions on South Korea were removed last year, I believe the U.S. will not let South Korea develop advanced missile programs that can actually strengthen its asymmetrical warfare capabilities. So my point here is that there are not that many options. Seoul has either to ramp up its military capabilities against North Korea in an effective manner or de-escalate the tensions in the Korean Peninsula. But what we can estimate is that Yoon Suk-yeol administration's active stance on strengthening ties with the United States will highly likely invoke Pyongyang to take bold steps in the coming months, because it would be an explicit signal for Pyongyang to just focus on its 5-year military modernization plan to beef up its defense capabilities against advancing Seoul and Washington's joint defense deterrence. Deployment of the THAAD anti-ballistic missile system could be one of the examples that can be a pretext for Pyongyang to take major missile tests like ICBMs or other ballistic missiles they are developing. And if the joint South Korea-US military drills are conducted with much more scale in the fall, then I think it will be the moment for Pyongyang to decide whether to conduct a nuclear test.
And Dr. Bennett, how concerned should we be about the speed of North Korea's weapons development?
Well, we don't know how fast they're developing their ballistic missiles, but their nuclear weapons, the director of the International Atomic Energy Agency was very clear a few months ago when he said that that North Korea was going full out in developing its nuclear weapons. You know, Kim threatened recently to accelerate his process of nuclear weapon development. That's probably not possible because he was already doing about as much as he could. And we haven't really slowed him. That's the key that we've got to then start looking at is what actions can we take to deter his efforts, hopefully to move to some kind of nuclear weapon production freeze, but at least to try and reduce the amount of nuclear weapons he's making. And North Korea with 100 nuclear weapons or 200 nuclear weapons is a nightmare that nobody wants to have other than Kim. And so we need to try to gain control of that process.
Mr. Shin, well, Kim Jong-un did say that the fundamental mission of the regime's nuclear forces is to deter a war, but that the nukes can never be confined to the single mission of a war deterrent. So what do you make of the statement? How do you interpret it? Do you see North Korea continuing to sort of create a sense of crisis on the peninsula?
As I said earlier, I don't think we have to overreact that point. What we now know is that North Korea is restoring tunnel number 3 of its Punggye-ri nuclear site. But I don't think it means that North Korea will conduct a nuclear test soon, because all the focus of the United States and the international community is on Ukraine. And I don't think North Korea will just blow up this favorable environment for them to keep advancing their missile programs under the blinded eye of China and Russia. I think what North Korea is trying to do in the Punggye-ri nuclear site is making all the necessary measures for its nuclear test first, so that its leverage on the negotiating table can increase naturally. There have been very detailed analysis with the satellite images of the Punggye-ri nuclear site to show how North Korea has been working to restore the nuclear site, but I think we also need to pay attention to the rationale of this movement. Since the beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine on February 24th, I think Kim Jong-un might think that the situation in Ukraine could actually happen in North Korea when it gives up its nuclear weapons. He utilized the Ukraine crisis as a justifiable reason for his nuclear development ambition. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has also affected South Koreans' fear of North Korea's nuclear weapons, as about 70% of South Koreans now think Seoul also needs to develop its own nuclear weapons to deter North Korea's nuclear tests. I think that is the point why Yoon Suk-yeol administration has emphasized the possibility of preemptive striking against North Korea if there's any symptom of North Korea launching toward the South Seoul.
But at the same time, Mr. Shun, do you think there is any room for inter-Korean diplomacy, particularly in the first year of the Yoon administration? I mean, to what extent do you think Yoon will pursue inter-Korean peace or joint projects for cooperation like the soon-to-be previous government?
Yoon administration will seek to reach out to Pyongyang as of Yoon's inauguration, but I don't think Pyongyang will answer their calls, as most of the cooperation you can do with North Korea can only be carried out when North Korea takes substantial progress in the denuclearization of North Korea. And North Korea has no interest in cooperating with Yoon administration, I think, based on Yoon Suk-yeol's hawkish stance on Pyongyang. Also, Kim Jong-un will never sit down with neither Yoon Suk-yeol nor the US President Joe Biden unless Washington and Seoul either lift the economic sanctions or permanently halt the joint South Korea-US military drills, which are the impossible things for Washington and Seoul to accept. So based on how Yoon downplayed Moon Jae-in's efforts for the peace process on the Korean Peninsula, I believe Pyongyang will keep questioning the intention of the Yoon administration's approach to the inter-Korean diplomacy if it engages. So I think there won't be any room for the inter-Korean diplomacy in the first year of Yoon's administration and possibly until the end of Yoon's term.
And before we go, Dr. Bennett, now what is the best way for Seoul, Tokyo and Washington to really deter the North's nuclear arsenal?
Well, I think President-elect Yoon has been correct in arguing that we need to strengthen deterrence. A year ago, President Biden said that he was going to implement stern deterrence against North Korea, but that really hasn't happened yet. So I think President Yoon has a lot of opportunities for doing that. But let's remember that if we do that and that only, Kim Jong-un is likely to escalate. It seems to me that the US and South Korea need to implement a policy of carrots and sticks. Let's tell North Korea that if they behave badly, they will be punished. But if they behave well, we are prepared to work with them. Let's take back the initiative. Let's not depend upon them to sit down for negotiations. Let's let President-elect Yoon and President Biden put a deal on the table. Doesn't have to be a whole deal like President Trump wanted to have. It can be a small deal, but at least something so that we start making progress on controlling the development of nuclear weapons. If we do that, coupled with telling Kim that he can't continue his bad behavior, that's the most effective way, I think.
Dr. Bennett, just an additional question before we wrap up this interview. Well, there's been growing talk of South Korea and Japan pursuing their own nuclear weapons to increase their deterrence against North Korea and now increasingly China as well. What are your views on this?
Well, I think at this stage that would be a mistake. It's not time yet for South Korea to fully take that on. They need to work with the US, and President-elect Yoon needs to sit down and talk with President Biden about this. This is a time when the United States needs to strengthen its nuclear umbrella, where the United States says, yes, we're prepared to trade an American city for Seoul if that's necessary to rein in North Korea, because Kim Jong-un needs to hear that, and the South Korean people need to hear that, so that we strengthen deterrence and strengthen the confidence of the South Korean people in the US nuclear capabilities. The US can also field some new nuclear capabilities that would make that more feasible. So there's ways to go that avoid South Korea having to develop nuclear weapons at this point in time.
I see. Well, this is where we'll have to wrap up the interview today. That was Bruce Bennett, policy analyst at RAND Corporation, and Mitch Shin, chief Korea correspondent of The Diplomat. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, over in the English Premier League, Tottenham Hotspur defeated Leicester City 3-1 on Sunday thanks to Son Heung-min's 18th and 19th league goals of the season. Now, playing at home, the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, Harry Kane's 22nd-minute goal from Son's assist gave Spurs a 1-0 first-half lead before the South Korean scored in the 60th and 79th minute to seal the win. The two goals from Son also shattered the goal for the number of goals scored by a South Korean in a European league in a single season, surpassing Cha Bum-geun's record 17 goals in Germany's Bundesliga from 1985 to 1986. Now, to diagnose brain diseases like dementia and Parkinson's, doctors typically give patients a test of their cognitive function. Now, this can take up to an hour, but a South Korean company has developed one that takes just 5 minutes. Yoon reports.
When a patient experiences memory loss, they visit a neurologist where they are given a neuropsychological test that evaluates the patient's overall cognitive function. This test has become a crucial step for neurologists to diagnose any brain diseases or to assess the progress of rehabilitation. But the existing test not only takes a long time, but there's also a shortage of people to oversee testing. As a result, 90% of the 4 million people in South Korea that need a neuropsychological test don't get tested on time.
Demand for the test is increasing, but there aren't enough clinical psychologists to conduct the test. In the end, it's a problem of supply and demand.
If patients don't get to take the test in time, it becomes more difficult to provide an early diagnosis of brain diseases, which consequently delays treatment and timely rehabilitation. But now, a local research team has developed a new cognitive neuropsychological test that solves both problems. It yields results in just 5 minutes, a significant reduction from the current 60 minutes, and it's also automated. Patients take the test online, from which preliminary results are automatically generated. Those evaluating the test result then make any necessary changes for the final report. The reduction in testing time brought by this latest development in testing software will allow medical staff to tend to more patients. The automated neuropsychological exam reading service is expected to be commercialized in the next 2 years after completing clinical trials. Yoon, Arirang News.
Now, for a look at the news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley standing by at Arirang Newsroom. Good morning to you, Matthew.
Good morning to you guys.
Hi, Matthew. Now, let's begin with the widespread demonstrations seen around the world this weekend.
Well, that's right. So, protesters across the world gathered for May Day to honor workers and shame governments into doing more for their citizens. This year, rallies in France opposed Emmanuel Macron's proposal to raise the retirement age from 62 to 65. Taking place a week after Macron's successful re-election, around 250 protests took place across the country with the backing of labor unions. Meanwhile, in Cuba, hundreds of thousands of people gathered on the streets of the capital, Havana, waving banners and pictures of Cuban revolutionary leaders. May Day marches in the country are a celebration of the 63-year-old revolution and a government-led rejection of Cold War-era embargoes imposed by the US. Greece, meanwhile, saw 10,000 people march outside the parliament in the capital of Athens, protesting rising living costs they say are unaffordable. This comes as gas and power bills have skyrocketed following sanctions against Russia following its invasion of Ukraine. Moving on to Guinea, as the military junta has said the country's return to civilian rule may take over 3 years. This according to Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, head of the junta that took power in September last year. The 39-month proposal comes after the other West African nations had called on the military to set a timeline for a democratic transition or face sanctions. Guinea's military overthrew former President Alpha Condé in September 2021, accusing him of widespread state corruption. Military leaders have also taken power in nearby Mali and Burkina Faso over the last 2 years. On Sunday, India saw some respite from soaring temperatures, with some areas 5 to 6 degrees Celsius below recent record-breaking highs. This follows parts of the country recording their highest ever average temperatures for April. Tourists have been using umbrellas as parasols, while many residents have been taking to rivers to cool down as the country grapples with power cuts. Extreme heat waves in India and Pakistan this year have seen melting roads and forced school closures. The heat wave is thought to be behind a landfall blaze in New Delhi that started on April 26th. Scientists warn that more than 1 billion people are at risk of heat-related issues in the region. Celebrations in Spain's Ibiza and Sevilla have made a return for the first time in 2 years. The weekend saw partygoers from around the world jet off to Ibiza as clubs opened their doors again. Market data shows that the island is one of Spain's fastest recovering destinations, registering even more bookings for this time of the year than before the pandemic. Sevilla, meanwhile, saw thousands celebrate its annual April Fair on Saturday. Festivities included locals dancing Sevillanas, a traditional dance for the region. The week-long fair is expected to draw visitors from all over the world, with a fireworks display by the Guadalquivir River set for its final day. This year, Spain expects international tourist arrivals to reach 80% of pre-pandemic volumes in the second quarter.
Good morning. The month of May started on a fine note yesterday. Well, May is also known as Family Month here in Korea, with Children's Day, Parents' Day, and Teachers' Day. Today's forecast is another pleasant day, but temperatures remain slightly below norms, so dress accordingly for the weather conditions. Sunny skies and decent air quality will be featured across much of Korea. Then eastern parts of the country could see sudden rain passing by along with thunder and lightning in the late afternoon. Central and inland regions are covered with lots of thick fog, so please drive with care this morning. Plenty of sunshine and a breezy start to the new week, but Chuncheon is kicking off the day just above 5 degrees Celsius. Highs will be similar to Sundays, Seoul going up to 19 degrees, Daegu topping out at 21 degrees Celsius this afternoon. It's going to be quite windy tomorrow, but overall, fine weather is in the forecast through Children's Day, which is also Ipa, the beginning of summer, according to seasonal terms. Then rain is expected on Friday in the capital area. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
Big day later this week with Children's Day, right? I mean, did you celebrate Children's Day in the UK?
Well, none of my relatives with that, except my mum saying no money for me, but I have to prepare some money for my nephew, so he'll be draining my bank account.
Yeah, it's one of those things, you know, growing up outside of Korea, when you're actually a child, never really celebrate Children's Day, but it's definitely going to be big for all the kids here in Korea. But nevertheless, that is going to wrap up our newscast for this morning, but we'll be back tomorrow for our Tuesday's edition of New Day at Arirang.
But do stick around for more updates throughout the day. Have a great day wherever you are. Goodbye.